child can have a good world unless every child does. We're a very small planet, and to understand that we cannot have homeland security until we define the homeland as being the entire planet. This is our home. And it's a pretty small home when you come right down to it. While I was in Ecuador, I was recruited by a vice president of a company called Charles T. Maine, and he was in the Army Reserves, liaisoning with the intelligence community. So he had all the information from the NSA. There's a funny thing going on here. Recruited me to work for this company called Charles T. Maine in Boston. And I went and I took the job. And then I was trained by this amazing woman named Claudine, who's described in detail in the books. She was very intelligent, very cunning, very seductive. She knew all my weaknesses and used them all and as a hook. And she also told me what economic hitmen do, what I would be expected to do. And in essence, what we do, what we've done since World War II on an increasing basis is to create the world's first truly global empire. And we've done it primarily without the military, through economics, through economic hitmen. And the way we work many ways, but perhaps the most common is that we will identify a third world country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil. And then we arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. But the money never goes to the country. It goes to our big corporations like Bechtel across the water here. We're on that side of the water, aren't we? They go to our big corporations that build huge infrastructure projects in this country, power plants, industrial parks, highways and ports, things that benefit a few very rich people, as well as our own corporations, but don't help the majority of the people, because the majority of the people are not connected to the electrical grid. They don't have the skills to get jobs in industrial parks, and they don't get to use the highways or the ports. But this country is left holding a huge debt, and this is by intention. So huge you can't possibly repay it. So at some point we go back and say, you owe us a lot of money, can't pay your debt, give us a pound of flesh. Sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies. Vote with us on the next critical UN vote. Send troops to Iraq in support of ours. Most people in the United States seem to believe that these troops that went to Iraq from other countries went in support of Iraq. They didn't. Almost all of them went because they were blackmailed. Their countries were blackmailed into sending them. And in this way, we've created this empire. When we economic hitmen fail, which isn't very often, I failed in Panama with Omar Torrijos and in Ecuador with Jaime Roldos. I couldn't corrupt these two presidents, couldn't bring them around. And when we fail, the next step is to send in the jackals. And these are men who overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders. Both Omar Torrijos and Jaime Roldos were assassinated by CIA-sponsored jackals because I failed in my job. As we all know what happened to Allende and Arbenz and Lumumba and Diem and Mossadegh and so many others. And so we've created this empire, and we've done it in secret. Most of us living in the United States don't realize that this incredible prosperity that we enjoy here is built on an empire, is built on slavery and servitude and tremendous suffering. We don't stop to think about the fact that we represent less than 5% of the world's population, and we consume more than 25% of the world's resources. We create more than 30% of the world's pollution. It doesn't take a very brilliant economist, which I never claimed to be, to realize that that is a failed model. 5% of the world's population consuming 25% of its resources, creating more than 30% of its pollution. You can't sell that model to China that has 20% of the world's population, or India with 17%. You can't sell that model to Ethiopia, to Africa, to Asia, to Latin America, to the Middle East. It just doesn't work. It's a failed model. It's not working here. We must change it for the sake of the young children of the world, the unborn children. We absolutely must change it. I think I'd like to share with you one of the stories that is told in detail in Confessions, in the Secret History of the American Empire, that kind of outlines this process. In the late 1970s, there's a country called Seychelles, which is an island country off the east coast of Africa. It's a very important country to the United States because right there next door to it is a strategic air base, Diego Garcia, which is where our biggest sorties into Iraq and Afghanistan and parts of Africa are conducted out of. This air base was given to the United States by the British government in the 1970s as an uninhabited island. It was not uninhabited. More than 2,000 people lived on this island. MI6, British intelligence, and CIA disappeared these 2,000 people. This is now coming out. BBC is launching a major campaign to expose this. But back then it wasn't known. And James Manchin was the president of Seychelles, a very good friend of Big Oil, very good friend of the United States. He was overthrown in a bloodless coup in the late 70s by Francis René, a socialist, who threatened to expose this whole deal with the Seychelles and get us out of there. So we decided Francis René had to go. I was sent to Washington to meet with a bunch of admirals and generals retired who now were economic hitmen to prepare myself to go to the Seychelles and corrupt Francis René, bring him around. I was at the same year that I was working in both Panama and Ecuador with Torrijos and Roldos. But first we wanted to find out whether we really thought we could corrupt René, and so this is a long, fascinating story that's detailed in the book, but the short version is that the Seychelles had a very important diplomat in Washington, an older guy, probably younger than I am today, but anyway. He had a young wife, and one of these generals had observed at a diplomatic cocktail party that the young wife, at several cocktail parties, the young wife was not happy. And so a young economic hitman was sent in to compromise her. This happens a lot in this business. And there's a very interesting story in the book about what went on with all of that. But eventually he succeeded. And the message that came back was that Francis René could not be corrupted. There was no point in me even going to Seychelles. And so I was called off the case. And I knew full well that the next step would be the jackals. I didn't know what they were going to do. But a few months later, I turned on the national news on television, and I saw that there was a big gun battle at Mahi Airport in Seychelles, that people who had been attempting a coup had been surrounded, and they hijacked an Air India 707. A few of you out there are old enough to perhaps remember this. It was covered quite extensively in '81. They hijacked a 707, flew it to Durban, South Africa, gave themselves up, were sentenced to life in prison and execution. End of the story, as far as we knew. Well, I know the ringleader now of this very well. The guy who organized this hit squad out of South Africa. This was a hit squad of South Africans and US mercenaries, jackals, very, very highly skilled jackals, 45, 46 of them, who went in to not only kill René, but overthrow the government, a big coup. They posed as a rugby team, taking Christmas gifts to the children of the Seychelles, which is a primarily Catholic country. And another force of black Africans was prepared in Kenya to fly into Seychelles. Once the assassination had occurred, the coup had occurred, the jackals would dissipate, fly out on commercial airliners, and this group from many different countries in Africa would arrive on the scene and take credit. So the US government and South African government would not be implicated. The deal fell apart at Mahi Airport when an alert security guard discovered an AK-47 in some luggage. Huge gun battle broke out. The Tanzanians, known as Tanzuk, mercenaries who worked for René, surrounded the airport, and the jackals had fought before with the Tanzanians and knew that they were fierce, well-trained, well-disciplined warriors.